if you didn't know, just got back from a trip to Utah. We were out there supporting a church plant that we've been able to support from the beginning called King's Cross Church. And they're up in Farmington, Utah, which is in the Salt Lake Valley. So what we did is we went and we were a part of signing up for the thing called Plant Camp. This is a group of churches that kind of get together, and they made an umbrella organization called Plant for the Gospel. And that umbrella organization really is concerned with how can we get more churches out? How can we support these churches because the ground is so hard, the laborers are so few? How do we band together and really support one another? So Plant for the Gospel is this sort of missions organization that's based in Salt Lake for Salt Lake. And Plant Camp is this thing where all these churches get to come along. It's cool. I'll just stand. How's that? Go get mine. I'm going to stand here like a weirdo. So we get to come alongside everybody and help. It's lonely, which is kind of crazy. It's a different thing. So I want to tell you just a quick little bit about what we got here. So here's the Salt Lake Valley, if you will, and it actually goes, that farthest tip up there is all the way up in Idaho, and then Spanish Fork, Utah is pretty far down, but that would be the whole range. We don't have time to talk about too much of it, but I want you to just be aware of a couple things. So there's 3.4 million people in Utah, and 60% of those are part of the Church of Jesus Christ of the Latter-day Saints. So 60%, which is actually down a lot further from where it was, but 60% is a lot. And then you're left over with 26%, which would be atheistic or secular. A lot of times when people deconstruct out of Mormon theology, they just swing, right? Because everything I've believed has been this. I actually talked to a guy who was like that in his driveway working on an old Spitfire he was restoring, and he said, 5 years ago they left the church and it blew their entire life up. Their whole family won't talk to him. And they really don't know what to believe, right? Because it's not just a single thought. It's an entire culture. It's everybody you know. It's all of your business. So then when there's no meaning, what do? You just go to numb. You go to pleasure. You go to something. And that's where they go. So 26% of there, 11 are comprised of other religions. So there's a surprising amount of Islam that has moved in the areas, particularly through refugee help. And then there's 2% evangelical Christian, 2%, and that would not we wouldn't consider all of those conservative either. So if you believe grace from God has saved you, you're in the 2%. Which, if you do the math real quick, is one gospel preaching, word-centered church for every 15,000 people. Pretty startling. And so I want to give you a little picture of that. If we were to zoom just in on this area, right, in Salt Lake proper, you'd say, okay, here's some churches. And so there's about 22 churches that would speckle throughout there. Some of them are kind of grouped up. Most of them have really, really good relationships with one another because they need to. So you say, okay, well, that's pretty good. I mean, that's a decent spread of churches out. But when you overlay that with how many Mormon wards there are, wards would be like their churches. They would use them. They fit about 300 people, the smaller ones. They use them 3 times every Sunday. They fill up. So you have each one represented about 900 people. These would be the wards in comparison. It's overwhelming, and this is actually the most secular region of the valley. Where we were, it's even less than that. It's even less Christians than when we were working up in Farmington, where King's Cross is, which would be just north of this map, about 15 miles. Pretty startling when you think about that. So real quick, just a little bit of what we had going on. We put out a lot of signs because a big part of what's going on there is people live in a bubble, and they've literally just never heard of another church. They just have no concept of that. So putting out signs, which is really hard to do in a big place filled with concrete, was a big part of what we did. We went out, we stomped them into the ground, and that site, we've actually had, I want to say like 6 families, Austin said, have shown up because they're like, hey, we just kept seeing that sign. Right? The Taco Bell in Layton, Utah has been like a big producer of people. They're like, hey, yeah, let me look up what that logo is. We went out and we sat in the park. This is what we call tabling. And different banners. One, how can I pray for you? What's the biggest need we have? I think that was this one. What's the biggest need? We had one that said, "Why atheism?" And the idea is just to kind of spark some conversations. And being able to spark those conversations is the long-term goal, but a lot of it was just grunt labor, where we went door to door, and we put a lot of things in people's houses, just in their doors to, can you give this a try? Look this up. What would this be like? And as we went, we tried to start as many conversations as we could. There's Levi escaping a barking dog, I think. We had a lot of ground covered. What's horrible, though, is you'd reach the end of the block, and after because you can tell which ones are Mormon, which ones aren't, depending on like what the signs they have and stuff, and you reach the end of the block and you realize, like, I just went to 50 houses and none of them are Christian. 50 houses and all of them are currently on their way to hell. They don't believe in the Jesus of the Scriptures. It was like really, really sobering. Because then after you did that on your block and your partner did it on the other block and the other people did it on the other, but you realize that entire subdivision is lost. And just thousands and thousands of people. How many flyers did we put out this week?
10,000.
I think we put out 10,000 flyers.
That was just
for Gospel Light. And then we did an additional
yeah.
3,000 or something for is that on?
King's Cross was, I think another 2,000 or 3,000 we put out there.
There was a lot. We were able to start a lot of great conversations, just being able to say, hey, I just want to ask you what, I like starting with joy. You guys were surveying. What were some of the questions that you asked people to just kind of get the thing going? You have to turn it on. That helps. Is yours on? Get them all on.
Okay.
There you go.
So when we were surveying, we kind of would start with like what the community needs, or we would just ask how we could pray for them.
Yeah.
In that moment.
How can we pray for you? We had a lot of really interesting conversations. A lot of lost people. The picture there, me in the green hat talking to Yosef. He's from Israel, and he came over. He's visiting his girlfriend, and he's culturally Jewish, and so he was really confused about Mormons, and he had no idea about any of this. But we had a great gospel conversation. This is Levi and Kylie helping a homeless man get his cat out of the tree. So we were all around helpful, just finding people where they're at. Yeah, and we were able to do this with a big group of other people. There were about 120 people from other churches as well, and we covered a lot of the valley. So with all that in mind, kind of getting a little picture of what we were doing, I wanted to ask you guys, so why don't you guys jump off just in whatever order here. What was your favorite part? What was one of your favorite parts about all this? Not all at once, though.
My favorite, this is the second year I went, and last year we did this tabling, and then we also had these surveys. We could go out and in the park and talk to people with a survey. Last year, I got shut out. I mean, I didn't get any gospel conversation. I walked home kind of head down, discouraged. And this year, total opposite. It was incredible. We went out and with these surveys and just kind of some general questions to get conversation going, and it's just amazing. I talked to one man that after we got done into our conversation for a while talking, he says, I just needed somebody to talk to. I haven't talked to anybody and been able to share anything going on in my life or even my family. It was such a big deal to him to just have somebody stop and care about him and have a conversation with him. We had a great gospel conversation. But he's just lonely. And we had many opportunities to share the gospel this time, and just some there's a lot of lost people. It was pretty incredible, and I just pray that this morning they're going to one of these churches that we're promoting out there.
Yeah. What about you, bud?
My favorite part was tabling, because at our table we got a lot of gospel conversations.
My favorite part was probably handing out the door cards for King's Cross, just because I got to talk to quite a few people, and I got some people who said they'd actually check it out, so that was really cool.
Yeah, absolutely.
My favorite part was probably just getting to know some more people that were on the trip, as well as like learning how to share the gospel better.
All right, what about hard? What was the hardest part about this trip, do you think?
My hardest part was getting out of my comfort zone and actually talking to people.
Yeah,
And the heat.
and the heat. It was hot. It was very hot. What about you guys? Hardest parts, what do you think?
The hardest part for me was hiking a mountain.
That was tough. It was a tough hike.
The hardest part for me is when we handed these cards out all week, and on Friday we went back to some of the same neighborhoods that we'd passed the cards out and actually rang the doorbell. And it was called prayer on the porch, and if they'd come to the door, it just basically asked them if they'd gotten the card and is there anything we can pray for you for. And we were in one of these concentrated Mormon neighborhoods that, no, I'm fine. We're LDS and everything's good. Well, we ended up praying with one of the men, but how lost they are with a false gospel, and how deceived they are that they think they're all right. That was
It's heartbreaking.
heartbreaking. Yeah.
The hardest part for me, like Kurt, was probably the prayer on the porch, because we had to actually communicate with actual humans. Also, it was really hot that day, and we had a lot of people say no.
Yeah.
The one guy said he was, I'm actually atheist, and then he showed all of his atheist tattoos. That was weird. But that was probably the hardest part for me.
It's hard. All right, well, where did you see, last question here, what's something God taught you? What was something you learned this trip?
I learned like that it's okay to get out of my comfort zone, and even good too. And I also learned, like, I didn't know much about the Mormon faith going into this, and like they believe your works get you like into their heaven, and that like really just puts God into a box. And so seeing like how great our God really is, that our works aren't what gets us anywhere, because He's so much greater than that.
I think that I learned that some people can come to church right when they hear the gospel, and some people it takes a while.
It's all right to be uncomfortable. You know, that is one of the big messages that's when we grow, is when we are willing to be uncomfortable and step out of our comfort zone and be used by God. And it's not just on a mission trip, but it should be our everyday life, being on mission with our walk every day.
Yeah. What do you think, Levi?
I learned like about the power of prayer and trusting God. Like He really will come through in that.
Yeah. Yeah, it was a great trip. It was it's inspiring in a sense to return home and to remember that like we're missionaries here too. You know, we're just as on mission right now as we are in Salt Lake, and it looks different, but we do need to be as purposeful. Can we get these guys a hand? Standing up here.